Hello, I'm Dell with Healing Frequencies Music, and I'm going to do a few videos, excuse me, that answer questions that keep coming in from customers and people on my email list, and just general questions that come my way. So the first question I'd like to address is this whole thing about musical frequencies. Is 528 hertz better than 526? Or which frequencies are better than others? I mean, which ones are ancient frequencies? This whole question of looking at how frequencies work based on what we know today. The most important thing that I really need to point out is we've only had the ability to measure exact frequencies in hertz since the Industrial Revolution, when a dude named Helmholtz invented some device that allowed us to measure specific frequencies. Up until that point, everyone tuned their instruments by ear. It's what each person, each performer, each composer, what each one did was based on personal preference. There was no way to measure 528 hertz. There was no way to measure A equals 444 or 440 or 432. Up until then, or even, well, I'm not even sure exactly when, but in the United States and in English speaking countries, we call notes A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The other version of that is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's just assigning another name to a note. Now, they call that the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's solfege. And you've probably seen the Kerwin hand signs, which are do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That is a version that music educators use to teach their students to recognize music. So when I was teaching ear training in college, I would go do, and then I'd go do, so, do, re, mi, re, do. And they would sing the notes based on what my hand signals were. The purpose of that was to teach ear training, to train your ears to hear intervals, perfect fifths, perfect fourths, major thirds, minor sevenths. That was the purpose of solfege, and to help people learn to sight sing a piece of music, which is all about taking something you've never seen before, putting it in front of your face and singing it. You get a starting pitch. Now you have movable do and you have fixed do, which means in most cases, do is always going to be C if it's fixed do. La will always be A. So if you are using fixed do, then it's like giving the notes another letter name. And depending on the country you're in, you're going to assign that pitch a name so you recognize it. It was the same thing in the ancient time, other than the fact that they named the notes after gods. Whatever, the god of sun, the god of whatever, that's how they named their pitches. Now, we don't know the distance from one pitch to the next because there's no way to measure it. So when you have all of these things that are coming in saying, oh, this is an ancient scale from 1,000 years ago, from the time of Guido of Arezzo, who was the guy who invented solfege, we don't know that because there was no way to measure it. What we call G, what we call F sharp, what we call C, we have assigned a physical name with that pitch. But who knows what it was 600, 700, 800 years ago, or even 250 years ago. We have some sort of an idea because they used tuning forks, and they would assign, they go ding, and they would tune their instrument to whatever that tuning fork was. And because we've got tuning forks in museums, and we have old keyboards, and we have organs that have been in churches for hundreds of years, we have some sort of an idea what the range is that people tune to. But the key that I really want to point out is we can't say anything is ancient because we don't have a way of measuring anything from before 200 years ago unless we have a keyboard of some kind or we have a tuning fork. But we have to also remember they didn't know that it was a specific hertz. So when we're looking for a specific hertz to do something, there's no way of knowing what it was before the Industrial Revolution because there was no way to measure it. So we have to be really careful when we are assigning a frequency to a note and saying, well, this has always been this note name. We don't know that. We don't know in the time of Pythagoras or even 3,000 years BC what people called a specific note. And it all goes back to measurement. If you don't have a way to measure it, you can't say specifically that that note is this pitch. Right now, we say A above middle C is 440 hertz. Now that A has been anywhere from 417 up to 457, 460, based on what we have found in measurements since the time of Bach, and possibly slightly before. I'd have to go back into my music history notes just to exactly remember which tuning forks are the oldest, but it's around the time of Bach, which would have been in the 1600s. Prior to that, there is very little evidence to show us that things were used to, this is a C, this is a D. The time of Guido, I believe they would have had to use movable do, which means do is going to be your tonic. Re is the next note in the scale. Mi is the third note. Fa, sol, la, and I'm going to squeak when I get up here. Ti, do. Singing above middle C for me is fascinating. But I'm singing with the music that's playing right now. So all of the solfege did is show you where the other pitches are in correlation to the fundamental, the main note, the main key. So do, that's your tonic. Do, so, do, tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant. Do, so, do, mi, do. And what I would do when people walked into ear training, I would say, sing this song in solfege. And I always started out with something cheesy like the squirrel song. So, mi, do, 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 do. So, mi, do, 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 do. Do, re, mi, fa, so, la, so. Fa, mi, re, do, etc. That is the purpose of solfege, is to help you identify the pitch level. Again, before there was the ability to measure it, 200 years ago, well, 1850s, 1860s, somewhere around in there, I have to do the math, you couldn't measure. So it was all based on how a performer or a composer heard the distance, the intervals of the notes. But we do know, based on Pythagorean ratios, that the scale that we use today is fairly close to those Pythagorean ratios. Your temperament will determine whether the thirds are sharp or slightly flat, or whether the fifths and the fourths are pure, are the octaves pure. Equal temperament, they're not quite pure. You know, they're all slightly off, so that you can play in all 24 keys. I'm talking about all the major and the minor keys. Modes are much easier to do in a variety of other temperaments because you're missing that major third, which was not a very in tune interval according to Pythagorean tuning. So I know this gets into a whole lot of information, and some of you might be going, "Ew." But the key point behind this particular video is to say, until we had measurements during the Industrial Revolution, we had no idea that 528 hertz existed. So we can't call it ancient. We just now say, oh, that note is 528 hertz. This note is 440 hertz. We can do that now, but before that, they couldn't. And the other thing is, it was all done by ear and what felt right to the musician. So that being said, you choose the frequencies that work for you based on what feels right to your body, to your system, just like the ancients always did. So I think it's important that we don't get stuck on, got to use this specific frequency, and that is the only frequency I can use. You have to choose what works best for you. So we will end this little mini tutorial and move on to the next one, which goes it to the next level. So thank you for listening, and feel free to check out healingfrequenciesmusic.com and read all the blog posts I have about this. I have lots of information, provide lots of sources for you to look at. If you subscribe to my newsletter, you get an email about every 7 days explaining this whole process, giving you lots of tidbits on frequencies. So I encourage you to sign up for the newsletter at healingfrequenciesmusic.com. Get lots of information about frequencies. And then make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. All right, have an amazing day and enjoy your frequency journey.